Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamar Orr. I am the Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students here at Roosevelt University. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here today to discuss the implications of the Derek Chauvin trial and police-involved violence towards communities of color. At the end of the panel's discussion, there will be 15 minutes held for questions and answers. If you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to add them in the presenter comment box. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's event, Reverend Dr. Janette Wilson. Dr. Wilson currently serves as Senior Advisor to Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr. and is the National Executive Director of PUSH as a volunteer or staff member since she graduated from law school in 1980. Additionally, Dr. Wilson serves as Senior Pastor of Maple Park United Methodist Church. Dr. Wilson began her career as a chemist, transitioned to the legal profession, and finally to Christian ministry. She is a co-founder of Wilson Howard PC Attorneys at Law Incorporated and a former criminal defense attorney. Dr. Wilson also developed the first public school interfaith community partnership in the United States for the Chicago public school system in 1997, and was later employed as the manager of school climate for CPS. Dr. Wilson spent most of her adult life as a civil rights advocate. She has utilized her investigative skills developed during her years as an environmental scientist, her negotiating skills developed while practicing as a criminal defense attorney, and her conscience as a Christian to assist minorities in receiving social justice and economic parity. Dr. Wilson's commitment to youth is unquestionable. She has spent her adult life hiring, mentoring, employing, and establishing internship programs for youth. Reverend Dr. Wilson, thank you for joining us. You are a true example of leadership and represent progress towards social change. Reverend Dr. Wilson.
Thank you so much. That's the best introduction I've ever had. I'm going to keep coming to Roosevelt. You make me feel important. I'm excited to be back at Roosevelt again on this particular panel because it causes me to go back to my trial roots, criminal defense attorney trial roots, as we will look at this Derek Chauvin trial, the murder of George Floyd. It is an interesting mix of public policy and coupled with a jury of our peers, which made what I believe to be a correct decision. And many people are very excited about what that means in terms of the nation. And so we have really a nice, diverse panel of experts to look at what this case really means to America, what it means to African Americans and people of color, and what it means to policing and the need to reform police departments all across this nation. So we have with us today Mr. John Fountain, professor of journalism, notable of journalism. He's been an assistant professor at Roosevelt University. He is the Dr. Susan Torres-Harding Professor of Psychology. Wow. He's professor of criminal justice. And so he's going to help us look at this trial from a number of perspectives, I think. Welcome, Dr. Fountain. So glad to have you with us. And he's a native of Chicago's West Side, which many say is the best side of Chicago. You know, I read what he writes all the time. He's a profound writer. He's an award-winning journalist, and he's a professor at Roosevelt University. He's a publisher. He's an author. He writes a weekly Sunday column. I don't know how you have time to do anything with all that you do, but he's in the major papers, the Sun-Times. He's been a national correspondent. He's everything that we would hope that a journalist would become, and so we're so happy to have you as a part of this panel. We also have Natasha Robinson. She's a lecturer in the Department of Government Law and Justice. She's worked as an attorney, practicing in criminal defense for 20 years. She's been in the Public Defender's Office for 12 years. She also headed the Law and Public Safety Academy. Really excited to have you share with us. as a defense attorney, I know you were probably sitting on the edge of your seat watching the television saying, now ask this question, don't make that objection. I know I can feel you. And so we can ask you all kinds of questions about what you saw and didn't see. Then we have Dr. Susan Torres-Harding, the clinical psychologist, professor of psychology, and director of the clinical psychology program at Roosevelt University. A lot of phenomenal research and academic interest in psychology, multiculturalism, race, and cultural effects on the health and well-being of diverse adults and children and families. So you can help us. We would love to have had you in jury selection. I mean, your kind of insight would have helped help us to predict who we should put on the jury, but also help us to think about the jurors who were selected, how they might look at different witnesses and different evidence and testimony. And so we're going to have time for questions, but we're going to make sure we go straight to the panelists now. Dr. Fountain, you've written about a lot of things. What did you see as a journalist? What is your perspective on the Chauvin case?
Oh, thanks so much for moderating this panel and for being here. And welcome to everyone who has joined us. I think that what I saw was reason for hope, but whether that represents progress is still remains to be seen. Because I'm old enough to have seen the videotape of Rodney King. I'm old enough to have have the name Emmett Till ringing in my ears, and my mother telling me as I was going to the Mississippi Delta as a little boy, you be careful when you go uptown, and don't look at white folk, and strange things can happen to young black men. And Emmett Till being from Chicago, and his funeral being held at the Church of God in Christ, and and seeing what Ebony and Jet magazine did in publishing those pictures in which Mamie Till Mobley so bravely, so courageously declared that I am going to show the world what they did to my son. And so I have, like most Black folk in America, this trauma heaped upon trauma after trauma after trauma, from Emmett Till to Breonna, and to George Floyd. And so I breathed a sigh of relief, because I wasn't sure that even with the incredible video evidence, that jury was going to convict Derek Chauvin of murder. So I applauded it, and I will tell you, I celebrated by saying some words that I cannot utter here. And it was ecstatic, but there was also a sense of great pain and wondering whether this is indeed going to signal something significant in the history as we continue to move toward justice and equality for all in this country.
Well, you've been writing, you've read and you've written about these police shootings that are happening all across America. Do you think that this is a major step forward in the finding of Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts?
I think it was a significant moment. Whether it is a significant step forward remains to be seen. Because even as the jury was deliberating, or even when the trial was going on, we saw the shooting death by a white police officer, female police officer, of another Black man. Right now, we're looking at the case of a Black man in North Carolina, and just saw before coming on that police have finally agreed to allow the family to review the police video cam. And so at the same time that we celebrate this verdict, I am aware of what it means to be a Black man in America, that no one knows, a cop doesn't know John Fountain on the street from Tyrone. And it really doesn't even matter that I can be shot dead for reaching for my keys or my cell phone. And the truth is that we are not sure that even in that case, that there is justice that is going to be served. And in the case of Laquan McDonald, a police officer was convicted. But in the end, that police officer who shot Laquan McDonald 16 times is going to be out of jail next year, having served less than half the time that Rod Blagojevich served, and he didn't take any money, and he certainly didn't kill anybody.
That's right. He didn't take a life. Attorney Robinson, you have been a defense attorney. You teach criminal law. You have, I know you watch this case every moment of it. And so, as a defense attorney, what did you see? What didn't you see? And I know it's hard for you because you would not perhaps be defending Derek Chauvin. So, when you saw and heard the verdict as a lawyer, criminal defense attorney, but as a lawyer, you know the next step. So, what did you think about the trial, the presentation of the evidence by the prosecution, and the response by the defense?
Well, first of all, thank you, Reverend Dr. Wilson, for having us here. When I watched the trial, I did not admittedly watch everything. And I did not watch everything because while I was interested in the process, I was also interested in the protection of my mind and my body and my soul. And so I could not ingest everything that was presented to me for me to feast upon as it relates to the trial itself. Because I was watching it at the intersection and integration of being a Black woman, mama, and criminal defense attorney formerly, and a professor now. So what I saw, I can divide in terms of substance, procedure, and emotion. In terms of substance, this is not the first time that we have seen a video that has gone viral that involved the execution of a Black man in daylight, in public. And I was reminded of Eric Garner, who was murdered in broad daylight, in public, where there were multiple perspectives of his lynching, and yet there were no charges brought. And the method by which he was killed was a method that was prohibited by the New York Police Department. So I watched this with a lot of caution because, as Professor Fountain has said, we've seen this before. We've been here before. And it is disgusting and enraging for this type of public square execution to occur and it not be an anomaly. So in watching, the direct and the cross, sitting there, and I'm like, I wish someone would just tag me in so I could just, I'm not going to be before you long. I just need a couple of minutes so I can get in with the direct and get in with the cross and then come out. In terms of the verdict, I have been on the other side of verdicts before, and so deliberating for 10 hours or less is not a surprise. It is not any indicia that the jurors did not consider all of the evidence, because there have been some juries that have taken way longer and come back with something, and you're like, did we watch the same trial? So I know, as a citizen and as a practitioner, there is a difference between factual guilt and legal guilt. And I have been questioned by many people in there saying, well, we all saw the video. Why is there even a trial? And the thing is that just because there is evidence, a body cam, a videotape, that does not automatically mean that that evidence is to be used in the prosecution. And even if it is used, that does not automatically mean that there is 100% credibility or weight given to that video by the trier of fact or the finder of fact, which is the judge, or in this case, the jury. So when the prosecution said in the closing, believe what you see, I thought that was powerful because, we can all be looking at the same thing and come away with different outcomes. In terms of what is next, this is the appeal process. So I want our audience to know that the appeal is coming. That should be of no surprise, because anyone who has been found guilty and convicted has the right to appeal. Now, that does not mean that they have the right to win the appeal, but they definitely have the right to bring it. And so Derek Chauvin's attorney is going to be taking all of the information, all of the objections, all of the things where he has, from the inception of the case until now, where he has felt the judge or the jury have erred, where they have made mistakes. That is preserving issues for appeal. Because if you don't raise it, you lose it. And so what's going to happen is that Derek Chauvin ultimately is going to be sentenced. What is a document that is going to be relied upon is called a PSI, or post-sentence investigation, which is like a book report. It's like a telling of who this person is, what this person has done. There will be factors of aggravation, which means why should Derek Chauvin get the max? And then there will be factors of mitigation, which is why Derek Chauvin should receive the least amount in terms of punishment. There may be a hearing where the family members of Floyd testify as to how this case has affected them. The judge will issue a sentence, and then there will be an appeal process where Derek Chauvin will still be in custody. But throughout that time, the Minnesota Court of Appeals will decide if Derek Chauvin should have his sentence overturned or it should be upheld.
Well, I think it's really interesting that we have not seen the trial of the other officers who were there on the scene at the same time. So that's another piece of this that has to go forward. Usually they try, as you know, to take the one that has the most visibility. They will prosecute first the one that they believe they're going to get a guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the primary actor. So now the other police officers are major accomplices to the murder. And so their trials will be coming up. And it depends on whether they take a bench or a jury. If I were representing the officers, and depending on the relationship with the judges, you would not take a jury in this climate.
And the severing of their cases is very strategic.
Absolutely.
Because they were all arrested around the same time, but them being tried separately is strategic. And Derek Chauvin not testifying is also strategic.
Yeah, because he's protecting his rights, because he has a right to remain silent at every step of the trial. He does not have to testify, but also it's that blue code of silence that also operates. And he is, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Torres-Harding, as a psychologist, you watched the trial or some parts of it. Did you watch Derek Chauvin's demeanor during the hearing?
You know, I first of all, thank you for asking me to be on the panel. It's a pleasure to be here, to be asked to present the psychological perspective. And no, you know, I feel like what John and Natasha mentioned, I felt like I had to protect myself because I found the witness testimony so traumatizing that and it kind of fits along with, you know, what John was saying too, in terms of like, this is just one in a long line of traumatic words, images, and also seeing the wheels of justice. Maybe it would have been the wheels of injustice play out. And so, you know, that I think is so, for me personally, is so upsetting to watch, because we've seen it so many times before, right? Where like things that are so obvious in your face, and then I know as a psychologist too, I mean, there are all kinds of rationalizations that people make, you know, through legal arguments or just in the real world too, you know, just non-legal people just talking about like innocence and guilt, where people make all these rationalizations to excuse why what is a very clear, you know, very obvious form of violence, you know, is somehow explained away. And I find that really very difficult to see that happen in the criminal justice system. So I did watch some of the eyewitness testimony. It's heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to see these, especially children and, you know, these young people who were trying so hard to save the life of someone they knew that his life was flowing away. And to describe that in this, what you know is a very stressful situation, to be on trial and you're going to get cross-examined and so on. It's that, that's why people say that, just the being part of that criminal justice system itself is a second form of traumatization for people, victims, right? And so I think I kind of experienced some of that too. So no, I didn't watch Derek Chauvin, although I would expect from like what I've seen in the media, like just that like just that like impassive demeanor, which we've seen so many times too. And the whole trying to present yourself in a very professional way. And at the same time, it doesn't take away from the very other reality of what happened and how he behaved too. It didn't even matter how he, in my opinion, how he would behave in a courtroom to see like that reality was happening. Oh, Reverend Dr. Wilson, you're muted.
I was I watched him, and I was wondering, because I went to the trial with Laquan, the murderer of Laquan McDonald, and the defendant sat with no emotion, very much like Derek Chauvin. It's somehow they just didn't seem to care. There was no remorse, no feeling. No, the witnesses are crying, and the defendant is sitting there as if he's in another world. And I thought that was interesting. And they tell the jury not to show any kind of reaction to what they hear. I'm sure that was extremely difficult in this case, because you had witnesses literally one after the other crying on the witness stand, which is not typical in these kind of cases. I've never seen witnesses. I mean, they were just very, very distraught. And I think to be a witness in a murder case where you were on the scene at the time, it is traumatizing. And so, what do you think the psychological impact will be for those young people in Minneapolis and all around the country who watched this trial?
I mean, I think that, unfortunately, this is just one example, which, actually having some measure of justice too, having that guilty verdict was definitely a sense of relief. Because I think that so much of this is, you see all this trauma happening, and I think it is one of many forms of racial trauma that people of color and that Black and Brown and other communities have to face. That you're continuously, being seen it, both in the media, such as all those, horrific videos where everything, people's murders, deaths are being filmed, and you can watch that, and those kind of images, are really, they're a form of trauma too, that people have to, and then you get all of the impact of, ongoing racial trauma. And I think that one thing that's tough is that, again, you can't look at this in isolation, because it's, a lot of people have not only witnessed just the trial, but have seen it in their everyday lives, have experienced, themselves or loved ones experiencing, really traumatic interactions with police. I mean, we talk at Roosevelt, for instance, we have a very diverse student body, people who live in Chicago, and in classes, people bring up their experiences with these traumatic encounters with police and people they know. And so it's like one of many, it's like a continual, not necessarily an onslaught, but it's just a continual kind of series of traumas that people have to deal with. And I think the effects of those ongoing, racial traumas is all of the impacts of what trauma does to the body too. And, people have all these psychological impacts. A lot of times we see people, especially who live in communities and people of color, especially young people too, who have to, you become aware very early on. The fact, like around 7 or 8 is usually when kids start to become more like, oh, wait a second, this is my racial identity. Oh, wait a second. People from my background are not valued in the society, or people like politicians hate people, from my group, and they're, saying we're all criminals, murderers, and so on. Okay. Like young children are exposed to this. So that accumulates and it causes what we would expect with trauma, being fearful of one's safety, worried about surviving situations, especially, encounters with police. And there's a lot of socialization, a lot of parenting that happens to help, children be able to survive, these encounters with police. There's a lot of, just hypervigilance, which means that you're just very aware of your surroundings, you're focused on the present, and, not sure if you're feeling safe. And unfortunately, that causes a lot of physical reactions too. It kicks off a lot of these these psychobiological stress responses. So people are on edge. People feel those feelings of anxiety. They feel symptoms of anxiety. They feel tense muscles. And if you're in that situation, it makes it harder to focus in school. It makes it harder to feel good about having good relationships with other people, especially with the police. But with other people in the community, you don't know if you can trust them. You worried about, are people going to mistreat me? Are they going to stereotype me? So people, sometimes, people can appear to be suspicious, and they're kind of mistrustful, and they get, kind of viewed as like, well, what's wrong with them? They're very suspicious, mistrustful, they're paranoid, but it's more a reaction towards this. People are not sure if they're safe in the situation, and dealing with that, cognitively, it's a real cognitive burden. It has all these negative effects in the body, all the stress responses. And I think that kind of played into what I think some of the reactions were after the verdict. I know for myself, like, I felt a sense of relief, but I also still felt like it wasn't like I was like ecstatic or anything like that. I kind of felt like, I think in order to deal with that trauma, sometimes it's protective to have a level of emotional numbing. You have to, in order to not be overwhelmed by those emotions all the time, you have to kind of switch that out, manage it. And I think that after the
okay, hold on.
Hold sorry.
Cause you about to numb me because it's overwhelming. I'm feeling everything that you said. I've watched everything.
Well, then I'll stop there. I'll stop there too.
No, we're gonna come back to you because I think what you're saying is important, and I wanted to, and I want you all to jump in, so that we have a more of a conversation. I wanted to ask each of you what you saw and what you felt from your various disciplines. But as we look at this case, all of us realize that this is not the tipping point necessarily. It's a step in the right direction. How do you feel, John? You're the only male on this panel. You're in the minority, and you're an African-American male. And as you said earlier, you're at risk. Yeah. It could happen to you, shirt and tie notwithstanding, professor of journalism notwithstanding, powerful writer, doesn't matter. You're a Black man living in America, walking while Black, driving, moving. What do you see in terms of some actions, listening to Dr. Torres-Harding and all of the psychological, the impact of this trauma of police involved shootings of unarmed murders, really, of unarmed Black men. And like you said, the day of the trial, the day of the verdict, another shooting. It's like, so what do we need to do? All of you. We'll start with the only man because he's the only man on the panel and he's the most at risk.
I think, well, thank you, Reverend Dr. Wilson, and the esteemed panelists. You all have covered this in such a way that is moving and makes me feel some degree of comfort as a Black man, because sometimes to walk in this skin and to live while Black, breathe while Black, drive while Black, professor while Black, be a journalist while Black, it is taxing. And I don't say that to say that, to whine. It is the reality of living in America in this skin. And I am also, as a Black man, fully aware that my suffering is not suffering alone, that, that I feel as strongly about Breonna Taylor and the injustice there, and Janette Young, I think, the woman who was whose house was raided by police officers, and she was naked, and they stood there, and nobody clothed her or averted their eyes. And so it is that kind of injustice that is inflicted upon all of us as a people that is this kind of trauma that is almost like, I would dare say, Groundhog Day. It just keeps on playing over again and again and again. And we ask in our soul, when is this going to end? And I think that part of what needs to happen is policy change.
Mhm.
We have to make sure that police are held accountable for their actions. You don't get licensed to kill, and you ought to be held to a different standard. And so I think while the verdict is a step in the right direction, we still need to see police held accountable by their own peers. I dare say that good cops know who the bad cops are on the police force.
They do.
And so they need to call that out. And someone mentioned the blue code of silence.
I did.
And
It's a blue
folks talk
code.
about Black folk in the in our communities not wanting to, quote unquote, snitch. Cops don't snitch on each other.
That's right.
Look at the reports that they file after there has been a shooting, and see whether they jibe with the video or with the evidence that ultimately is borne out. So I think there needs to be policy change. There needs to be policing reimagined, and understanding that in some ways I've heard folks say that the way policing is playing out today is the way it was meant to play out. The fact that policing evolved from the old slave patrols that became the militia groups that enforced the Jim Crow. And so we have to change. And the last thing I'll say is this, that you cannot legislate matters of the heart. And so we have got to change America. Dr. King said, where do we go from here, chaos or community? And it is an important question. It is important for America to begin to see all of its citizens as entitled to, it is a right as an American citizen, to justice and equality.
Well, I think we're at chaos for sure. Attorney Robinson and Dr. Torres-Harding, how do you all see, what do we do going forward? You talked about the trauma, the psycho-emotional trauma that all of us experience in different ways. You talked about the next steps after this verdict. What do we do? Mothers and young people, what do? Because they don't feel safe. They don't trust the police. So what do we do?
I would start off by saying that to Professor Fountain's point and to your point, Reverend Wilson, is that yes, accountability is an issue, but I can't be fully held accountable if I'm not first fully transparent. If I am not taking my own decisions and beliefs and privilege and bias and looking at them not just through the light of my own experiences, but through the light of the persons who I am supposed to, quote, serve and protect. I don't know if I would characterize this as being more cynical, and no offense to, my brother, but I don't know if he's the most at risk, because there are too many stories and too many reports of Black women who, while they may not be chronicled in the same way that Black men are chronicled, they are definitely being killed, murdered, shot down, lynched. And when I say Black women, I am including Black transgendered women. Those stories are not being told, and they're not being shared in the same way or with the same gravity of concern as, say, others. I know that every time I try to have a sigh of relief, I can't breathe. I can't catch my breath, because in the same way I was waiting for the Chauvin verdict, it is the same way that I couldn't even have a moment of silence before there was yet another name that came across my text notifications. And so to answer your question, where do we go from here? I don't know if I would recommend that we have any forward movement until we take account for where we are right now. Where we are right now is, to paraphrase Dr. William Augustus Jones, who wrote the book God in the Ghetto. He posited that one's theology then determines one's anthropology, which then determines their sociology. So what a person deifies, what they worship, then determines how they order the humans in their society, and then that determines how they treat the humans in their society. We live in a country that puts in a hierarchy white, male, militarism, capitalism. And so anything other than that, we are deemed to be the other. And so if we have policies and procedures and persons who weaponize their privilege and their preference, then we are never going to get the justice and the equality that we deserve. It is in the laws of this country where persons' privileges have been weaponized and turned into legislative, executive, judicial outcomes. The Constitution of the United States, Reconstruction laws, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, the Civil Rights Voting Act, New Jim Crow. All of these are times in history where we just, and when I say we, I'm talking about Black community, where is always something that is created to cover us. But under the covering is where the killing resides. When you have police officers who are weaponizing their racism through discretion, where it's not the gun or the taser or the billy club that is the weapon, but it's their discretion,
Yes.
then I don't know where to go from here, because my Blackness I can't take this off. And yet that is the weapon, to quote Reverend Tracy Blackman, that is the weapon that they fear. I can't get rid of this. So I don't know where to go from here. What I will say is that I believe that discussions like this are helpful. But to be quite honest, I'm tired of talking. I'm sorry, I'm tired of talking, because our country loves history, but rarely do we make progress. We love to talk about it, but when it comes to addressing our weaponized discretion, not just on the street, but in classrooms, in boardrooms, in legislative chambers, in the ballot box, we run our mouths all the time. And yet when it comes to, the seat at the table, if you will, my invitation gets lost.
Well, we're gonna talk about it. What I need you to do, we're gonna do a round robin. I got questions in the chat. I need y'all to make shorter answers.
Can I interject here just for 1 minute?
No.
Just
Hold on. You come back with your interjection. 1 minute. I got to get to one of the questions. Is was the demeanor of the defendant a tactic in the trial? His stoic nature was. Do you think that was his defense mechanism, Dr. Torres, as he's sitting there showing no emotion? You think that was a defense move to protect him from what he was feeling?
Perhaps, although I think definitely, I'm sure that he was instructed to behave in a certain way, by his lawyer, his legal team. However, I think that, it might also be a product of just dehumanization. I've always been surprised by the ability that people have to really dehumanize people, from different groups. And there's been a long history, of course, of those processes happening, in this country too, directed towards, because America, of course, invented the whole idea of white and black and created these categories. And so all again, long history of just how people just rationalize why it is okay to enact violence on people. And a big part of it is the dehumanization. If you do not see that person as worthy of having rights or dignity or even a life, because I remember when George Floyd's death, made news, a year ago, where people were saying, well, he was passing this, trying to pass all this counterfeit money, something like that. Again, and that's what they usually do too with these. Whenever, well, he wasn't a Boy Scout. He did all this stuff. Well, he had run into the law, and I think that's a cognitive strategy of dehumanization. If you paint that person as not worthy of human rights or dignity, that it's okay to kill them. Like that's a very extreme kind of view. But I personally think that probably Derek Chauvin and other police officers who do that they probably so dehumanize people. They don't see them as worthy of life. They're just a criminal, and it can get very extreme over time. And unfortunately, that sets the stage for violence. So he may have gotten very used to just not even thinking about him as a real person, or so caught up with his own rationalizations for what I did was procedurally correct. However, he did in his own mind. He's no longer capable of being able to extend that compassion.
So,
towards
John
the
Fountain, Professor Fountain, I agree with you. What do you want to jump in?
I forgot my point. No, I didn't. I'm kidding.
No, you didn't. Don't even try it.
No, what I want to say is I am so grateful for everyone's profound insights, and thank you, Professor Attorney Robinson, for your insight. And I just want to add, and say that our suffering as Black men and Black women is not separate. We have reigned together since Mother Africa, and we have suffered together. But it is an empirical truth that more Black men were lynched and more Black men are shot dead by police. I have Black sons and Black daughters, and I give my sons a different speech, the talk, than I've given to my daughters. I don't worry about a police officer seeing my daughters as a threat. But my 6'4" son and my 6'1" son, I know that it is a different threat. And so I say that to say that if my son were out there who was killed by a police officer, it would not only impact my son, it would impact me, it would impact his mother, it would impact his grandmother, it would impact his Black aunts, his Black sisters. So this trauma that we have suffered collectively, I think that one of the things that is really disturbing for me is that there, and I'm not saying you have done this, but there is the sense within our own community that we are weighing the suffering of each other based on gender. The crimes against, the murder against transgender women is vile, unjust, should not be happening, and we have to be as outraged about that as we are about any murder that is happening against any of us. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. My students and I, over the last year, launched a project that was from my heart and soul, looking at 51 mostly African-American women who were murdered since 2001. And so I can't afford to say that I'm going to focus only on Black. I'm focused on our people. And our people suffer. And we have got to understand it. And let me just interject this, that I'm concerned when a white cop kills us. But I'm concerned when Jocelyn Adams is sitting in a car with her father on the west side of Chicago, where I grew up, and at McDonald's drive-thru, and someone opens fire in broad daylight and kills this child. And I don't hear anybody saying Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. Black lives do matter. And it has to become more than a hashtag. We have to embrace that as a community and be as outraged.
And I think we have to begin to police the community ourselves.
Yeah.
We could talk about reimagining police. We have to reimagine neighborhoods. There
Amen.
was a time, once upon a time, when your neighbors knew each other.
Yeah.
And there was an expectation of behavior in our neighborhood, whether you were the police or Pookie Ray Ray, you knew you had to walk a certain way when you went by Miss Jones' house, because Miss
Yeah.
Jones didn't work because she's retired and she would tell what you did. So you had to behave a certain way. There were watchers in the community, nosy neighbors who knew everything that was going on, and that they kept watch, but they also kept some balance in the community. And so I agree with you. The outrage does not seem to rise to the same level when we kill each other. Reverend Jackson often says that blacks kill blacks, it's Miller time. Whites kill blacks, it's riot time.
Mm.
I mean, that's just a different in our psychological perceptions of our lives. They matter when a white person kills us, but apparently it doesn't seem to matter when we kill each other. So I think that's another discussion. Two questions in the chat were about mistrial. The defense made several motions that were denied, calling for a mistrial. One, they said that the jury was not sequestered, and I thought about that. That means they were not sequestered up until it was time to deliberate for a verdict. Normally, when you tell me as a juror when you tell the jury, don't talk to anybody, don't watch television, you don't have to worry about it because you put them in that jury room. They stay in a hotel together until they reach a verdict. And I mean, there's several strategies to that. And Attorney Robinson, you know that oftentimes when the jury came back quickly, I knew they were in favor of prosecution. Usually, when they take a long time to deliberate, it's going to be a hung jury, or they're wrestling with whether they have found reasonable doubt. So I was glad they came back quickly. That meant there was no doubt in their mind he was guilty. Now, I didn't think they were going to find him guilty of everything. But the mistrial motions, do you think that they might be able to? They made those motions so that they could appeal based on those factors. The jury was not sequestered, and the fact that the whole trial was publicized on television. Even though the judge told the jury and asked them every day, did you watch television? Did you read the newspaper? Did you talk to anyone? What do you think about that?
To be in alignment with what you said about short answers, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. The longer answer is that yes, it is strategic. The defense attorney has to make every effort to preserve issues for appeal. So the sequestering, asking for a mistrial for that, he has to do that. Otherwise, he loses that right. Saying that comments made outside of the courtroom, such as the comments by Congresswoman Maxine Waters, whether or not he actually is correct with his assessment, he still has to make those objections so that he can preserve it for appeal. So a mistrial that he made the suggestion for is not necessarily saying that he believes a mistrial can happen, but that he is preserving it for a greater argument later on with the Minnesota Court of Appeals.
And so the other question that's in the chat, and I keep trying to read this small print in the chat, they want to know, do you think there's any possibility or hope for a change in how we perceive each other?
Mm.
I'd like to take that one. Because I
Please
definitely
take it,
think
because everybody else is like, no.
I think the answer is yes, and I think it mirrors actually what Professor Robertson was saying earlier too about. I think she mentioned this about just the stories and how it's important to hear people's stories. And actually, that is a really great way for people to restore humanity instead of looking at statistics or at being part of a legal proceeding where everything is so highly regimented. Just listening to people's stories, hearing about their lives, their backgrounds, go a long way towards restoring those connections. People, and actually in my field in psychology, people have talked a lot about community policing. We have a long amount of like decades of research show that those are very effective strategies to help repair some of those fractured relationships between communities and police. And I think part of that is because it involves that contact, people getting to know each other and knowing that, oh, you're not this scary other person. And, you know, they do all this dehumanization, othering, and so on, but getting to know each other as people can go a long ways. Unfortunately, we're in a country where segregation is just as bad as it was when, you know, Brown versus Board of Education, you know, has been happening that works against our connections, but definitely hearing each other's stories, working together on equal playing fields. That I think is, from the psychological perspective, is probably going to be the best strategy to try to give back people's sense of humanity and counteract these really negative forces.
How do white women or white people normalize this type of conversation and have it in other sectors? This is the last question I think we can do. Hello? Y'all don't know?
I'm filtering my answer because I have an answer, but I don't.
You want me to answer it?
No, I can answer it. For myself, myself personally, as we would say, I don't know necessarily how to teach people how to do what needs to be done. I'm sure there are certain nuances that are present when having those conversations. What I will say, and I will hush, is that I get fatigued with people asking me to teach them about, well, how do I engage in diversity and inclusion? And it's like asking someone who has received a wound, well, teach me how to help you heal. Teach me how to help you not be subject to this type of mistreatment. I would just say, just had a conversation. The conversation, it ain't meant to be comfortable. It's not meant to pat you on the back. It's meant to be had. And I applaud the person who posted it and say, well, how do I have these conversations? That is a first step, is in allyship. Have the conversations and hold your people, your allies, whomever your circle is, hold them accountable in word and deed. It goes past conversations and it goes to action.
I would like to answer that one too quickly, if I can. You know, as a non-Black person of color, you know, I mean, I feel like sometimes feel a little caught between, you know, the whites and the Black communities, and we'll learn about both. And so, and also working with white students who ask these same questions. I think that one thing that's, for myself and my own journey in terms of becoming more racially aware and understand how it impacts my own life and the people I work for and work with, is just, I think that there's so much information out there that people don't know about. And right now we're in a moment where a lot of white people are saying, well, what do I do now? And they're looking towards the people of color. And like Professor Robinson said, people, you know, everyone I talk to that's a psychologist of color is like, we're all sick of talking about it. We're exhausted. But the reality is so many resources and information out there. It's been around for decades. I think just, you know, kind of learning more about it, reading, just consuming media, you know, watching. I mean, it's all there. People have been saying the same things in terms of how do we transform a society literally for decades, you know. These are not new messages. So I think for a white individual, some of it's a lot of just kind of discovering was often on the fringes, becoming more mainstream. And also just talking about it and just having conversations, but then also just trying to just develop those relationships and just learn more about these different communities, spending time in these communities too that are different from your own community. I think that exposure will also help people to just be able to just talk about that and learn those new experiences and understand just race and how it impacts their own life. Because a lot of times that's invisible to white people because they can arrange their lives so they don't have to address any kind of race stuff. So I encourage people to engage with it, learn about it, and make those inroads. It's a great way to start.
Well, I think the first question I would ask is, do you see me?
Mm.
And then I'd ask, how do you see me?
Mm.
Do you see me through the lens of media, the television shows, the music? It sees me as less hardworking, more violent, more sexual than I am, less intelligent than I am. How do you see me? And then I think that to help you heal, you must know that I want to help you heal because racism is a sickness that pervades America. It's not normal. You go around the world, this is not the pattern. It's more people of color than any white people. We are the majority. And so if you look at all of the continents, it's people of color. And so this small minority has tried to convince the majority there's something wrong with us. No, you have the illness and we're trying to help you heal. That's why I don't have a problem talking to them. But the treatment is painful because it requires a drastic change in thinking. But one of the things we have to realize, we're all on this planet together. And we have to learn to live together. We've learned to live apart, but we've not learned how to live together. We
I think
need
that's
each
the
other.
lead in. Yeah, I think that's the lead in that the person's asking because she's talking about how as a white person to talk to other white folks, and so I think that is a good start.
Well, and the question she has to ask them: how do you see them? Because the lens through which you look at people will determine how you treat them. If you and I walk down the street, and if I see these young black men with pants hanging down, caps turned backwards, sagging, I don't know how they walk in the first place. If I see them as thugs, I will treat them differently than if I see them as my son who needs to turn his cap around. Or if I see young ladies, I got on the bus one day, and when I first got on the bus, it was mostly old people, and we were quiet. We didn't have all this noise. Whole group, we stopped at a school. Whole group of girls got on the bus. They cursed everybody that they could publicly, loud, because they can't hear. So I said, I need you to stop. And they looked at me. I said, because it's giving me a headache. So if you could just do this, not curse anymore until I get off the bus, I'd be grateful. Because it's giving me a headache, and I'm old, and I just can't take it anymore. Because they had cursed for about 4 blocks. I don't even know what they were upset about. And they kind of looked at me. I guess the mingly gray at that time hair made them think she's just old and crazy. So they did stop. Because I said, this is just not normal for me. And it's really bothering me. Sometimes, and I didn't say it, as if I was really threatening them with anything. I just said, I put it on me. Help me so I can make it to my stop with this noise. And I think sometimes it's the approach that we have to begin to shift the approach. And white America has to shift its thinking of us. We're no longer slaves. We never were, never should have been. And we're not property. We're humans. We're thinking people. We're loving people, caring people. We have families. And that's why I have a problem with the media images of us, because it perpetuates this thug mentality with drug dealers and drug users and whatever. Having said all of that, you all want to make some closing remarks, 1 minute each? We got to go. You're back. Where you been?
I've been listening with my ears open and my
Like,
brain and
how
heart
much longer
exposed.
do we need to go?
It was phenomenal. I'd like to extend a very big thank you to our moderator, Dr. Wilson, as well as to all of our panelists, Professor Fountain, Professor Robson, Professor Torres-Harding. You all were simply amazing. If you can't tell from the comments in the comment section, it seems like we need a part two of this conversation because we could really talk about this for a lot longer. This conversation will be turned into a podcast on the Roosevelt's official podcast and Justice for All. You can find it at roosevelt.edu/podcast or wherever your podcast platform of choice is. Thank you again, everyone who was able to join us. Please enjoy the rest of your
Can we
afternoon.
get a copy?
Absolutely.
You gonna send it to me?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank all of you for tolerating me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are